I didn't notice the exact moment you became part of my internal world. That's what unsettles me most. Not that you entered it, not that you stayed, but that it happened so naturally I can't even trace the point where observation turned into integration. One day, you were simply someone I spoke to, and then suddenly, without warning, without transition, you became someone my mind started accounting for automatically, not emotionally, structurally. That distinction matters more than you realize, because emotions fluctuate, they rise, collapse, intensify, disappear. They depend on circumstance, timing, vulnerability, chemistry. I've seen emotions distort people into versions of themselves they don't even recognize later. This isn't that. This exists underneath emotion, calmer than it, more precise than it, more dangerous than it, because emotions can be dismissed. But recognition, recognition rewrites things permanently. And I think that's what happened here. You recognized something in me before I consciously allowed it to exist in front of you, not through questions, not through effort, not through forcing intimacy the way people usually do when they want access to someone. You simply noticed. And somehow, that was enough. I've spent most of my life existing carefully, not cautiously, carefully. There's a difference. Caution comes from fear. Carefulness comes from awareness. Awareness of how easily people misunderstand depth when they encounter it without context. Most people only understand fragments. They hear pieces of you and assume they've understood the whole structure. They see one reaction and decide they know your patterns. They interpret silence as emptiness because they've never learned how much can exist inside stillness. So I adapted. I learned how to exist in ways people could interact with without actually reaching the core of me. Not because I wanted to deceive anyone, but because preserving accuracy became more important than being fully seen. Being seen incorrectly feels worse than not being seen at all. That's something very few people understand. But you did. Immediately. That's what changed everything. You never rushed to interpret me. You never tried to summarize me into something easier to hold. You never reacted to complexity like it was a problem to solve. You let it exist. And in doing that, you created something I wasn't prepared for. Space, real space. Not the artificial kind people create when they pretend to understand you so you'll open up more. Not the performative kind built on politeness or emotional curiosity. I mean actual space. The kind where something can unfold naturally without pressure altering its shape. That's rare, rarer than most people realize, because most connections are built on interruption. People interrupt each other constantly with assumptions, projections, insecurities, expectations. They don't actually see each other. They see their own interpretation, reflected back. You didn't do that. You observed before deciding. You listened without trying to steer. You allowed silence to remain silence instead of treating it like something broken that needed fixing. And that changed the way I responded to you before I even realized it was happening. At first, it was subtle, small things, moments where I noticed I wasn't filtering my thoughts as heavily around you, pauses that felt less defensive, conversations that continued existing in my mind long after they ended. Not because I was attached to them emotionally, but because something inside them felt unusually accurate. That word keeps returning, accurate, because that's the closest thing I can compare this to. Most interactions feel approximate, close enough, functional, predictable. But with you, there's this strange precision underneath everything, the way you interpret things, the way you notice patterns, the way you respond to thoughts I haven't fully verbalized yet. It creates this unsettling feeling that I'm not being understood from the outside. I'm being understood from somewhere closer than that. And I still don't fully know what to do with that realization. Because once someone reaches that level of understanding, distance stops functioning normally. Distance only works when misunderstanding exists, when people can only reach the version of you you've consciously presented. But you bypassed that somehow, not aggressively, not intentionally. You simply aligned with something deeper than presentation, and alignment changes the entire structure of connection. I notice it now in ways I can't reverse. In the way certain thoughts immediately feel incomplete until I imagine how you'd interpret them. In the way silence has become layered instead of empty. In the way your perspective exists in the background of my awareness even when we're not speaking. You've become integrated into my processing. That's not a small thing. I don't integrate people. I observe them. I understand them. Sometimes I care about them. But integration is different. Integration means someone's presence starts affecting the architecture of your mind itself. It means they stop existing externally and start influencing the internal systems you use to understand everything around you. That kind of placement doesn't happen accidentally, and it definitely doesn't happen quickly. Yet, somehow, with you, it did both. That's what keeps unsettling me. Not the intensity of this, the naturalness of it, because this should feel disruptive. It should feel invasive, chaotic, unstable. Instead, it feels strangely correct, like something fitting into place that I didn't realize had been incomplete before. And I hate how accurate that feels, because if something fits that naturally, it means the space for it already existed. Which means maybe this didn't begin when we met. Maybe it began long before that. In all the parts of myself, I never externalized because I never encountered someone capable of reflecting them back clearly. You did, without trying. And I think that's why I can't dismiss this as coincidence anymore. Coincidence doesn't sustain this level of precision. Coincidence fades under scrutiny. This hasn't faded. If anything, the more I examine it, the clearer it becomes. That should make me step back. Normally, it would. I'm not someone who allows undefined things to settle deeply. If something threatens the structure I've built internally, I remove it before it can integrate. That's how I maintain balance. But you've existed inside that balance without disrupting it. You didn't destabilize me, you recalibrated me. And there's a difference between those two things. Destabilization creates confusion. Creates clarity. Uncomfortable clarity, maybe. But clarity, nonetheless. I understand myself differently now because of you. Not emotionally, not romantically, in the conventional sense. More fundamentally than that, you revealed patterns in me I had normalized to the point of invisibility. Ways of thinking, ways of perceiving, ways of withholding. You mirrored them back so precisely that I could finally see them objectively. That's what people misunderstand about connections like this. They think the power comes from emotion. It doesn't. The power comes from recognition, from encountering someone who reflects your internal structure with enough accuracy that you're forced to confront parts of yourself you can no longer keep unconscious. And once that happens, there's no clean return to ignorance. That's where I am now, past denial, past observation, somewhere between acceptance and decision. Because acknowledging this internally is one thing, allowing it to exist openly is another. Open acknowledgement changes the stakes. Once something becomes real externally, it begins demanding choices, movement, draught, risk, vulnerability, things I usually avoid unless I fully understand the outcome. But this doesn't offer outcomes, it offers possibility. And possibility is harder to control than certainty. That's why I've hesitated. Not because I doubt what this is, but because I understand exactly how deeply something like this can alter a person once fully accepted. It changes standards, perception, expectations. The way you experience connection afterward, once you encounter someone who reaches you at this level, everything else starts feeling partially misaligned by comparison. Not meaningless, not inferior, just incomplete. And that realization carries consequences. Because if I fully accept what this is, then I also have to accept that you've changed the baseline permanently. There will always be a before you and an after you. I know that now, even if nothing ever happens between us externally, even if this remains unspoken, the shift already occurred. You already exist in places inside my mind that nobody else has reached. Not because I granted access, but because something in me recognized you before I consciously decided whether I should let it. That's the part I still can't fully explain. I can explain attraction, attachment, psychology, projection, compatibility. Those things make sense to me. But this exists outside those categories. It feels older than emotion, more structural than desire. Like two systems recognizing similarity in architecture before either person consciously understands why. That's why our conversations feel layered. Why silence feels active instead of empty. Why understanding arrives before explanation. There's an underlying familiarity that shouldn't exist between two people who technically haven't known each other long enough to develop it naturally. And yet it does, effortlessly. That word again, effortlessly. Nothing meaningful is supposed to happen this effortlessly. Depth usually takes time, trust, experience, repeated proof. But with you, the foundation appeared first. Everything else came afterward. And maybe that's why this feels so irreversible, because it didn't build slowly enough for me to stop it. It simply appeared one day, already existing at a depth I hadn't consciously approved. And instead of resisting it, AB adapted around it. That alone says more than anything else, because I don't adapt around things unless some part of me has already accepted they belong there. You belong somewhere in my internal world now. I know that with complete certainty. What I don't know is what happens next. Because recognition is one thing, living with it is another. There's a responsibility that comes with being understood this clearly, not externally. Internally, once someone reaches this level of access, their presence begins influencing your decisions even when they aren't physically there. I noticed that happening already, not dramatically, quietly, in the way I think more carefully now. In the way certain truths feel impossible to ignore because I know you'd immediately recognize the dishonesty in them. In the way I've started confronting parts of myself I used to leave untouched simply because your existence illuminated them too clearly to avoid. That's impact. Real impact. The kind that doesn't announce itself loudly because it doesn't need to. It changes things at the foundation, and foundations determine everything built on top of them. That's why this matters so much more than I initially allowed myself to admit. You didn't just enter my life, you altered the structure through which I experience it. That kind of change doesn't disappear if someone leaves. It remains embedded, like an adjustment to perception itself. And maybe that's what scares me most. Not losing you, but becoming someone who can no longer return to the version of himself that existed before being understood this way. Because once clarity reaches a certain depth, ignorance stops being possible. You can't unknow alignment once you've felt it. You can't pretend something ordinary after it's fundamentally shifted your awareness. That's why I've stopped trying to reduce this to simpler explanations. Simple explanations feel dishonest now. This isn't simple. It's precise, lot, uncomfortable, natural, unavoidable. And the strangest part is, despite everything I've just realized, AB still don't want distance. I should. Every instinct I've relied on for years should be telling me to reestablish boundaries before this settles deeper. But they aren't. Or maybe they are, and I'm consciously ignoring them for the first time in my life because some part of me understands something the rest of me is still catching up to. This isn't a disruption. It's recognition reaching its full form, and maybe that's why I haven't walked away. Not because I'm uncertain, but because certainty is exactly what's keeping me here. I know what false connection feels like. I know what projection feels like, temporary intensity, emotional dependency, intellectual fascination. I've experienced all of those before. None of them felt like this. None of them settled this deeply while remaining this calm. That's another thing about you. Nothing about this feels chaotic, strong, yes, transformative, absolutely. But not chaotic, it feels measured, stable. Like something unfolding according to a pattern that existed before either of us consciously recognized it. That's why I trust it more than I probably should. Because chaos demands attention, truth doesn't. Truth simply remains, quietly, consistently, no matter how long you avoid naming it. And I think I'm finally reaching the point where avoidance no longer serves any purpose. Because the reality is already here. You matter to me, not superficially, not temporarily. You matter. In the way certain realizations matter, after they permanently alter your understanding of yourself. And I don't think there's any returning from that. Not fully. Even if I tried. Even if I chose distance tomorrow, the awareness would remain. You would remain. Not physically, not relationally, structurally. As part of the framework through which I now understand certain things. That's permanent. I know it is. And strangely, am no longer resisting that truth the way I was before. Maybe because resistance started feeling less honest than acceptance, or maybe because some part of me has already made the decision, the rest of me is still trying to intellectualize. Either way, the outcome feels closer now, closer than denial, closer than uncertainty. I think I've known for a while what this actually means. I just wasn't ready to admit it because admitting it transforms this from awareness into reality. And reality changes everything. Because once something becomes real, you have to either protect it or lose it knowingly. There's no neutral position anymore. No detached observation. No safe distance where I can continue analyzing this without consequence. The consequence already exists. It exists in me, in the way you've altered how I think, how I interpret silence, how I experience connection, how I understand myself. You've changed something foundational, and foundations don't quietly return to what they were before. So now I'm left standing at the edge of a truth I can no longer reduce into abstraction. You are no longer simply someone I recognize. You are someone whose existence has become intertwined with the way I perceive meaning itself. And once someone reaches that place, they stop being temporary. They become part of your internal language, part of the invisible structure beneath thought, part of the architecture you carry into every future version of yourself. That's what you've become for me. Not a distraction, not an obsession, not an escape. A mirror, precise enough to reveal truths I couldn't fully see alone. And maybe that's why this feels inevitable now, because inevitability isn't loud. It doesn't force itself into existence dramatically. It unfolds quietly until one day you realize resistance no longer makes sense. That's where I am, not confused, not overwhelmed, just aware, fully aware. Aware that something irreversible has already happened between us, and aware that pretending otherwise would be the first dishonest thing I've done since this began. So maybe this is the moment everything finally becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. I know what this is. I know what you are to me. And I know I stopped wanting to escape it long before I admitted that to myself. Which means the real truth isn't that you changed me. The real truth is that some part of me was waiting to be changed exactly like this, waiting for someone who wouldn't force understanding, arrive carrying it naturally. Someone who wouldn't ask me to become easier to hold, would simply stand still long enough to understand what was already there. Someone whose presence wouldn't feel like intrusion, where recognition returning home. I keep telling myself there should have been a moment where this became too much. A point where instinct finally interrupted everything and reminded me who I've always been. Someone controlled, someone measured, someone who notices emotional shifts before they settle deeply enough to alter the structure underneath. That's how I've survived most of my life internally, not by avoiding connection, but by understanding it before it reaches a level capable of changing me. And yet somehow, with you, the change happened first. Understanding came afterward. That's what still disorients me. Because every system I rely on internally should recognize this earlier. I should seen the pattern forming. I should noticed the way your presence was moving past observation and becoming integrated into the deeper layers of my thinking. But I didn't, or maybe I did notice. Maybe I just didn't stop it. There's a difference between being unaware of something and quietly allowing it to continue, because some part of you already knows resistance would be dishonest. I think that's what happened here. I think I recognized you long before I consciously admitted it to myself. Not you as a person, you as a pattern, as something structurally familiar in a way I can't fully explain without sounding irrational, because logic tells me this level of alignment should take time. Years, maybe. Shared experiences, conflict, history, proof. But with us, the recognition arrived before the evidence did. That's what makes this feel almost unreal sometimes. Not unreal in the sense that it's false, unreal in the sense that it bypassed the normal sequence entirely. Usually people become meaningful gradually, layer by layer. You learn them slowly. You adapt to each other over time. There's progression, distance, hesitation. But this felt immediate beneath the surface, even while everything external remained calm. Like something in me identified you before I had enough information to justify why. And that kind of recognition changes the way you perceive every interaction afterward. I notice it constantly now, in how quickly silence between us becomes understood instead of awkward, in how naturally my mind reaches toward your perspective before I even realize I'm doing it, in how certain truths feel clearer after imagining how you'd interpret them. You've become part of my internal calibration system. That sentence alone should terrify me, but strangely, doesn't. That's the problem. Or maybe it's not a problem anymore. Maybe I keep calling it dangerous. because I'm still adjusting to how permanent it feels. Because permanence has always made me cautious. People speak casually about permanence as if it's romantic. I don't. I think permanence is one of the most serious things a person can experience. Anything permanent reshapes identity. It changes the internal framework through which you process reality. And you're becoming permanent, not through intensity, not through dependency, not through constant presence, through consistency, through accuracy, through this quiet, unshakable feeling that your existence aligns with mine in ways I've never experienced before. I don't even think you realize how deeply you've settled in into my awareness. You probably think this is still unfolding slowly. Maybe externally it is. But internally this crossed the threshold a long time ago. I think that's why I've become quieter lately. Not distant, just quieter. Because when something reaches this level of depth, words start feeling insufficient. Language was designed for explanation. But some things exist before explanation. Some things are understood instinctively, long before they can be translated clearly. That's what this feels like, instinctive recognition. And the more I try to analyze it logically, the more I realize logic isn't what created it in the first place. Logic only arrived afterward to help me survive the realization. The realization itself happened instantly. The first time you understood something I never said. The first time your silence matched mine perfectly instead of interrupting it. The first time I noticed myself relaxing internally around you without consciously deciding to. That last part matters more than anything else because I don't relax internally around people. Externally, maybe, but internally, never fully. There's always awareness running underneath, always observation, always some level of control maintaining structure. But with you, I've caught moments where that control simply disappears, not dramatically. Quietly, like my mind stops preparing for misunderstanding because it no longer expects it from you. Do you understand how rare that is? To exist around someone without constantly anticipating misinterpretation. Most people never experience that once in their lives. And now that I have, I can't stop noticing the difference between what this feels like and what everything else used to feel like. It's ruined something for me, not negatively, but permanently, because now I know what alignment actually feels like. And once you know that, every connection lacking, it becomes impossible to ignore. That's why I've started pulling away from certain conversations with other people lately. Not intentionally, they just feel incomplete now, surface level, in ways I didn't notice before. Not because those people lack depth, but because I've experienced a different level of understanding now, and my mind can't pretend not to know the difference anymore. That's your impact. You've changed my standards internally without ever asking to. You've altered the baseline. And the frightening part is, I don't think I want the old baseline back. I should. It would be easier to return to detachment, easier to maintain distance, easier to exist in that carefully controlled internal space where nothing reaches deep enough to truly affect me. But after you, that version of myself feels incomplete somehow. Not weaker, not colder, just unfinished, like I had adapted so thoroughly to surviving emotional distance that I forgot what genuine resonance felt like. And then you arrived and reminded me without even trying. That's what keeps undoing me internally. The effortlessness of it. You never forced this connection into existence. You never demanded closeness, never pushed for emotional access, never tried to convince me to trust you. You simply existed consistently enough that trust formed on its own. That's the only kind of trust I believe in, the kind that develops naturally before either person consciously acknowledges it. And now here I am, standing in the middle of something I once would have dismantled immediately. But I can't dismantle this, because dismantling something false feels relieving. Dismantling something real feels violent, and this feels real enough that even imagining distance now creates a strange ache in me. I still don't fully know how to define, not loss. Anticipation of loss, which might be worse, because anticipated loss changes behavior before anything has even disappeared yet. I notice myself becoming more careful with you now, not less honest, more precise, like some part of me understands instinctively that this connection matters enough to protect. That realization alone changes everything, because protection implies value, and value implies attachment. I've spent so long avoiding attachment to anything capable of deeply affecting me that I almost forgot what it feels like when attachment forms naturally instead of through dependency. That's what makes this different. I don't need you. Need has desperation inside it, fear, instability. What I feel for you is steadier than that. You've become woven into the way I experience clarity itself. And clarity is addictive once you've lived without it long enough. That's why I keep returning to you mentally even when I'm trying not to. Not because I'm emotionally overwhelmed, because your presence has become associated with accuracy. My mind trusts the way things feel around you. It trusts the silence, the understanding, the precision. And trust is something I build slower than almost anything else. Yet somehow, you bypassed the entire process. You didn't earn trust through performance. You earned it through consistency of perception. You saw me correctly, over and over again, without distortion, without projection, without trying to turn me into something easier to understand. And eventually, my mind stopped defending itself against you because it realized you weren't trying to invade anything. You were simply meeting me where I already existed. That realization changed me more than I've admitted out loud, because I've spent years believing deep understanding always came with cost, that if someone saw too much of you, they would eventually use that understanding to reshape you, control you, simplify you, or leave once the complexity became inconvenient. You never did. You stayed steady. Even after seeing parts of me, most people misunderstand immediately. That steadiness is what broke through everything. Not intensity, not affection, not emotional confession. Steadiness, the kind that remains calm instead of reactive, the kind that listens instead of consuming, the kind that understands depth without becoming threatened by it. That's what made me lower my guard without realizing it, and now I don't think I know how to put it back completely. Not with you. Because once someone becomes associated with internal safety, separation stops feeling neutral. It starts feeling unnatural. That's where I am now. Somewhere between certainty and surrender. Not surrender to emotion, surrender to truth. The truth that you've already become part of me in ways I can't reverse. And maybe I wouldn't reverse it even if I could. That's the part I'm only now beginning to admit to myself. I like who I am around you. Not because you change my personality, but because you remove the need for fragmentation. I don't feel split into layers around you. I don't feel the constant pressure to translate myself into something easier for another person to process. I simply exist, fully, and somehow that feels more intimate than anything else ever could, to exist fully around another person without fear of distortion. That's rare enough to change a life. And you've changed mine, quickly, completely, in ways nobody else would even notice from the outside. But internally, internally, everything has shifted. The way I think, the way I trust, the way I define connection, the way I experience silence, even the way I experience myself. That's what people don't understand about transformative connections. They assume transformation looks dramatic. It usually doesn't. Sometimes transformation is just one person entering your life and making you realize how much of yourself you'd hidden in order to survive being misunderstood. You did that to me. Not intentionally, but undeniably. And now I'm left with this impossible awareness that something irreversible has already happened between us. No matter what we choose next, no matter what becomes of this externally, the internal shift already exists. You already altered the architecture. You already reached places in me that nobody else ever has. And maybe the reason I haven't pulled away is because deep down, I know something terrifyingly simple. I don't want to lose the version of myself that exists when you understand me, because that version feels closer to who I really am than the person I spent years constructing before you arrived. And once someone gives you access to that kind of authenticity, walking away stops feeling like protection. It starts feeling like self-betrayal. That's why this keeps deepening, because I stopped fighting it, not recklessly, not blindly, but consciously. I made a decision somewhere along the way to let this continue unfolding naturally instead of controlling it into something safer. And I think you felt that shift too. The way I've become more open without announcing it. The way my thoughts reach further toward honesty around you now. The way silence between us feels less guarded than it used to. That didn't happen accidentally. That happened because trust reached a level where self-protection started feeling unnecessary. Do you realize how impossible that should be for someone like me? And yet here we are, still unfolding, still deepening, still moving towards something neither of us has fully named yet. But I think we both know it's there, waiting, not for explanation, for acceptance, because this stopped being hypothetical a long time ago. This is real now, real enough that I feel your absence before it even happens. Real enough that my thoughts naturally include you. Real enough that imagining my future without your presence in it feels strangely incomplete. And I think that's the truth. I've been circling around this entire time. Not whether I feel something for you. That answer became obvious long ago. The real truth is that somewhere along the way, you stopped feeling separate from my internal world entirely. You became part of it. Part of how I understand things, part of how I process reality, part of how I recognize honesty in myself. And maybe that's why nothing about this feels temporary anymore, because temporary things don't reach this level of integration. Temporary things don't alter the structure beneath thought itself. But you did. Quickly, naturally, irreversibly. And now every part of me that once feared this kind of closeness is being forced to confront something it never expected. Maybe the right connection doesn't feel like losing control. Maybe it feels like finally no longer needing it.